Hello Alphabets, AychekHD here. By now, some of you have made your way partially through my first Let's Play, that being Final Fantasy VI. Or perhaps you're looking through my archives from the future and have seen some of my other Let's Plays that I'm planning on doing. That's really surreal to think about, actually. Anyway, by now, you've already learned a little bit about me, through the rambling commentary that I've given. Unless this happens to be your first video, in which case, welcome! Hello! Nice to see you. Either way, whether you're familiar with my work or not, I thought it might be nice to do a little video here that's a bit more structured than my Let's Plays, as well as informing you just a little bit on who I am. In that vein, I decided to start a top J list of some of my favorite games. What's that? What do I mean by top J? Well, that's simple. Everyone does a top 10, but I'm HKHD. I have to be a little bit different. You see, what a lot of you probably don't know is that H, A-Y-C-H-E, is just the phonetic spelling of my first name, H. As in the letter H. No, it's not short for anything. No, my parents weren't hippie. Look, it's just H, okay? That's why I call you my alphabets. I considered briefly referring to my followers as my eyes, since, I follows H, but I made things feel a little creepy. Maybe not. Anyway, so, seeing as I am a letter, why do a top 10? Top 10's a number. Top J. That works for me. But top J what? Well, as a gamer, I am a fan of different genres of video games. And within those genres, subgenres, departures, it's a lot to choose from. So I figured I'd start with RPGs, as they were they were one of the very first games, aside for, your basic platformers like Mario, things like that I really got into. So, RPGs it is. Specifically, the contents of this list are what I call party-based RPGs. Games like the main Final Fantasy line, where the point of the game is to use a party of characters to make it through the game, even if people challenge themselves to use only one character from time to time. Now, why am I specifically targeting party-based games? Well, like I said, there are several subgenre that exist within the RPG genre. You've got, your party-based, your tactics-based, your adventure, your MMO. It's easier for me to pick favorites and showcase games that I've played by breaking them down to their respective subgenre. My first RPG was actually one of this particular subgenre itself, so, holds a special place in my heart. For this list, as to how I've picked them, I'm sure some of you will have your questions on that. I'm going to lay out my criteria here. A, the alphabetical placement of each game on this list can be a little fuzzy. It doesn't actually follow any sort of scale other than like an arbitrary combination of enjoyment versus nostalgia and the game's technical merits, things like that. You'll understand as I go through the list, hopefully. B, all the games on this list are ones that I have played and beaten. Some of them I've played and beaten multiple times, others only once. While there are plenty of RPGs that I've started and played through, there are plenty still that I haven't actually finished, unfortunately. I will offer an honorable mentions portion of partway through, sort of to address games that I've started, enjoyed, but for one reason or another, I just never finished. It'll also contain games that I've found difficult just placing in the list because of the sheer volume of choices. C, I will limit myself to 2 games per franchise. I have to do this. I really do. Or it's possible about half the list could end up as Final Fantasy titles. I like Final Fantasy. What can I say? And D, the final RPG. My picks for this list are exactly that. My picks. The choices on this list are my favorites picked by me. I know you're all going to have your choices, and you're going to have your suggestions as to things that you think should be on my list, but I refer you to Rule B. If you're wondering why your favorite game isn't on the list, odds are I haven't finished it, I never played it at all, or it's just one that didn't make it on my list, but it might still be one that I played, and I enjoy, and that's perfectly fine. Go ahead, write up a list of your own favorites, and leave them in the comments. I mean, who knows? Your comment might inspire me to play one of your favorite games as a Let's Play. Or just to play it just to check it out. You never know. You never know. So, without further ado, let's get started. This is AychekHD's Top J Party-Based RPGs. Letter J, Dragon Age Origins. Dragon Age. Created by BioWare as a sort of spiritual successor to the Baldurs Gate and Neverwinter Nights series of games, Dragon Age Origins places you in the control of a Grey Warden. Grey Wardens are specialized warriors who, thanks to a specific ritual, have the capability of detecting and fighting the demon-like horde known as the Darkspawn. While anyone is capable of facing off against the Darkspawn, the Warden has the sole advantage of being able to be the only one to truly destroy the archdemon that usually leads the Darkspawn horde when they arise. And one of the most memorable things about Dragon Age for me was the character creation. I mean, unlike other RPGs of its kind where the choice of race or class meant little more than a different skill set, Dragon Age broke the mold by having these choices actually matter to your story. Choose a human of the noble heritage and watch as your manor is assaulted, and later, retake it from those who stole it in an epic battle. Now, choose a dwarf of the noble heritage. You get framed for murder and sent away, only to later come back and find yourself in the middle of a heated fight over the throne, partially motivated by your accused crime. Now, one of the little touches that always got me was a little girl in the alienage in Nenerim. You see, during the human noble storyline, you meet an NPC. It's an elven woman by the name of Iona, who, if you play your cards right, ends up in your bedroom that night. This woman, as you speak to her, mentions having a daughter named Amathine, who is back in Nenerim. Now fast forward a few hours into the game, and we find ourselves in said elven alienage, where most of the elves and dwarves in the city live. As you're walking through, you pass by the little elven girl. Her hair is the same color, and mousing over her reveals the name, Amathine. It's one of those little things you might not notice if you're not paying a huge amount of attention, and most importantly, if you haven't played the intro to the human noble storyline. For me, this little thing just shows the amount of detail BioWare likes to put into their games. Oh, it has been stated many times by reviewers far more skilled than I that the game's combat can be considered broken at times. Still, as someone who's played through it multiple times with different characters, I found the combat enjoyable enough, and quite reminiscent of the games it's meant to be the successor to. Add in an engaging story, a whole cast of characters to be buddy-buddy with. Save Sten, who to this day I can't figure out how to make happy. Screw you, Sten, you blow backwards. And moral and philosophical choices that haunt you for days when you've got one awesome adventure. And my pick for letter J. Letter I, The Legend of Dragoon. Now, let it be known from this moment forward, I love dragons. So for me, most any game featuring the capability of using a dragon as a gameplay mechanic, or using a dragon's powers in this case, automatically gets a boost in favoritism. And Legend of Dragoon is no exception. Often compared to Squaresoft's behemoth Final Fantasy franchise, Legend of Dragoon was considered to be Sony's attempt to compete with that behemoth, and in my opinion, it did just that. Now the visuals were at the time quite striking, and, at least to me, still hold up fairly well, even for a PlayStation title. I mean, sure, the cutscenes weren't quite up to the level of Squaresoft's, but it still evoked a cinematic feel, and I thought they were still quite good. The storyline... okay, so it's the plot of a Power Rangers series, but hey, I like Power Rangers. And really, there are some pretty nice little twists and turns as you go through the game. Especially when dealing with, well, I won't spoil it. Black Monster. The combat system is where the game really shines. Now, some people criticize it as too complicated, but I enjoyed it as a sort of added challenge. The game utilized something called additions. Now, think of additions as sort of an evolution of the timed hit mechanics from Super Mario RPG. But depending on what addition you had equipped, you have anywhere from 1 to 6, maybe 7 different consecutive timed hits, represented by moving squares on the screen, and equating to a long combo string that adds more damage and more spirit points, which are used in Dragoon transformations. Ah, Dragoon transformations. Utilizing a specific dragon spirit, each character is able to call upon the power of an elemental dragon and transform mid-combat into a winged version of one of the Mystic Knights of Tir-na-nog, basically. In Dragoon form, the additions changed to a timing-based roulette, which is a bit more lackluster in execution, but makes up for it in awesome animation. Usually deals with flips, twists in the air, and usually pretty fun to watch. This is also the form in which various magic spells are able to be delivered. Now, near to the end of the game, some tactical planning does need to be done. There are several items that exist which make it rather dangerous to be in Dragoon form for more than 1, maybe 2 turns at a time. And there you are, living high on the hog and about ready to lay the smack down, and then, oh, 1-hit kill. Well, that blows backwards. Combine everything together, from a decent story to the transformations, the combat, searching for Stardust so you can fight the secret super boss, and you've got a pretty well-rounded RPG, and a game that will always have a place on my favorites list. Now, if only Sony would revisit the IP and give us a sequel. Letter H, Super Mario RPG, Legend of the Seven Stars! So, what do you get when you combine 2 legendary franchises into one? Well, it seems so long as one of those franchises is Square, you get something pretty epic. They collaborated with Disney to bring us Kingdom Hearts, and before that they collaborated with Nintendo to offer our favorite plumber some RPG action. It's said that this is the game that spawned the widely popular Paper Mario franchise. I'll admit, I never really got into those games, but I sure as hell got into this one. Combining some of my favorite classic Nintendo characters such as Mario and Bowser, with new characters such as Malo and Geno. Geno World! Where did that come from? Anyway, combining new and old, Mario RPG's combat and exploration system feel right at home in the Mario universe. The storyline's pretty simple. A giant sword falls through the sky and shatters the Star Road before impaling itself in Bowser's castle. This leads to an awesome adventure to locate the 7 star pieces that broke away from the Star Road. During our adventure, we learn that Bowser's not actually as bad a guy as we thought. We meet Wario's ugly cousin. No, really. Here. Look. Look at him. Look at these two. Booster and Wario have to be related. I can't be seeing things. And fight a battle against a bunch of multicolored, axe-wielding teenagers with attitudes. I'm starting to notice a trend on this list. Maybe. While a lot of RPG elements are pretty standard fare as we know them now, this was back when Squaresoft was in its prime, and a lot of polish went into the gameplay, especially during battles. And they didn't just make a Final Fantasy game with a Mario polish. Oh no! They catered everything they could to making the game lighthearted and fun, and building off of Nintendo's then lighthearted attitude. From the music, to the animations, to weapons, armor, and accessories, Square didn't overlook a thing. And for those of you who wanted a bit of a challenge, the addition of Superbox Culex, who uses a sprite inspired by Final Fantasy VI's artwork and using the boss battle theme from Final Fantasy IV, is a nice little touch. In the end, with a lot of polish, a fun soundtrack, and a few memorable characters. Geno World! I swear I heard it again. Did you? And a few memorable new characters, Super Mario RPG easily has its place on my list
Geno World!
Damn it! Letter G! Earthbound! Now, if the previous game on this list was quirky and fun, then this game is an LSD trip. Brought to us by HAL Laboratories, the same company responsible for the Super Smash Bros. Series, Earthbound is a bright, vibrant, quirky, and terrifying game. I remember my first time playing the game. It was as a rental when I was in elementary school, and I wasn't prepared for the shock I was going to get. A kid in his pajamas? Cookies and hamburgers as healing items? It's fighting crows with sunglasses? A time-displaced bee as a companion. The hell is this game, man? And that was just the first hour. Keep playing and you end up fighting the whole police force. Hippies. Aliens. Zombies. Placed in the slippers of young Ness, a child born with psychic powers and a home-run swing, you gather a party consisting of a psychic girl, a genius inventor, and a karate master. You adventure all over the world, combating the increasing influence of Gygus, an interdimensional alien entity who's literally going insane, and can only be soothed by the sound of a song that's broken into 8 parts throughout the land. Now, when I was a kid, I had no idea what this game was, or what to make of it even. I just thought it was cute and fun, and the idea of beating people up with bats and yo-yos was always appealing. It wasn't until later in life when I played the game to completion and found it to be quite deep and engaging, and just a little bit dark. See, I played it again when I was in high school. This time I played it all the way through, and I have to say it's probably one of the more memorable experiences in my young life. In a way, Earthbound reminds me of one of those sitcoms that has the touching, serious moments that make you stop and think. Well, for instance, throughout the game, Ness can gain a status effect called homesick, and the only way to cure it is to go back home. Well, or at the very least call your mom for a chat. I remember the first time I ever had the status come up, I actually felt bad for the little guy. I mean, I'd played other games where a young child was forced to leave their home to go on an adventure. My character in Pokemon, for instance, never had to call home just to hear his mother's voice. But Ness did, and that meant something to me. It made me think. I mean, if I were ever on some sort of adventure like that, would I get homesick? Would I be able to just carry on when all of my being wanted to go home and see my family? Why isn't such a thing ever addressed in other games? I don't know. Delving into the secrets of aliens, cults, and fuzzy pickles, the adventures of Ness and crew is really only comparable to one other work in my mind. The innocence and fun combined with the moments of dark intelligence and dealing with more grown-up ideas and some of the strange creatures one faces, in a way, bring back many of the same feelings I felt when watching the series Avatar: The Last Airbender. It's just another little bit of proof that shows that children's shows and games can deal with mature themes that can be understood by all ages when one really just sits down and thinks about it. If you haven't played this gem, I definitely recommend you check it out. Letter F, Xenogears. Now, of all of the games on this list, Xenogears tops the list as the RPG it took me the longest to finally play. While I've had a PlayStation in one form or another for many years, it wasn't until about 1.5 years ago that I finally sat down and played this. Having played it, I don't know what took me so long. Created by Squaresoft back in its heyday, and with music composed by Yasunori Mitsuda, the genius behind the soundtracks of Chrono Trigger and Chrono Cross, Xenogears is a gem of a game I wish I had experienced earlier. It's a science fiction epic utilizing technology to explain things both magical and mundane. And the topics tackled in Xenogears range from the meaning of humanity to the meaning of memories, identity of an individual, the rights and wrongs of letting an organized religion gain too much power, slavery, all very adult topics in the end. And that actually makes me quite glad I did wait to play this till later in life. You see, Xenogears released in America back in October of 1998. I was 12. Had I played this back then, I highly doubt I would have been able to understand a lot of the plot, or some of the deeper meanings behind some of the more subtle entries. I mean, don't get me wrong, By this point, I had already played my share of RPGs, so the conventions of the genre wouldn't have been difficult to pick up, but the story and plot would have gone way over my head. Now, speaking of conventions, once again, we see why Squaresoft was such a giant in gaming back in the mid to late 90s. Changing up the game just a little, Xenogears' battle system uses the same ATB that had been shown since Final Fantasy IV through 6, Chrono Trigger, but it made use of some very interesting mechanics, specifically those seen more in fighting games. Instead of your basic attacks with weapons, combat in Xenogears has you inputting button commands relating to a light, medium, and strong hit, a convention they would revisit in Chrono Cross. But unlike Chrono Cross, however, the party members are capable of stringing these commands together in preset button combinations to initiate an extra ability called a death blow. And later in the game, the characters are able to save up attacks and let loose a number of death blows strung together all at once for extra damage. The characters have access to certain mystical abilities, from Fei Fong Long's Qi to Ellie's Ether. It's never exactly explained where these abilities come from, whether they are inherent in all humans, or are technological in nature, or actually a form of magic, or maybe just a manipulation of some kind of energy field. You know what? I'm okay with that. It's like the Force in the original trilogy. The Force was just this mystical energy field that didn't need any scientific explanation. It was wonderful and awesome to behold, and trying to put a quantifier on it, it'd be impossible. Thankfully, Xenogears never ruins things by explaining that ether comes from something as stupid as midi-chlorians. Now, the spiritual successor to Xenogears, Xenosaga, does explain its own version of ether as meaning a special theory of rudimentary, and it's basically explained as being nanomachines that use science to create magic-like effects. In Xenosaga, which is far more science fiction-based than Xenogears, which is more similar to a science fantasy, it makes more sense. But for Xenogears, I'm happy being left with not knowing. Now, on top of regular combat through individual battles, every character is given a giant fighting robot, or gear. Now, these gears add another level of combat, as each gear has abilities on its own, which are even different from the characters who pilot them. Every now and then a battle will ensue where you fight a giant monster or another gear, and you'll need your own gears in order to defeat them. Similar to Power Rangers, I suppose, though I more liken it to a Gundam series. The plot is long, and by this point some of the twists that come can probably be seen about a mile away. The story as a whole is well worth it, especially if you delve into some of the backstory of certain characters, one in particular leading to learning a lot more about the main character's past. The only unfortunate thing is the incomplete feel of the whole second disc. Well, there are a lot of theories surrounding the skeletal nature of the second disc of the game, especially considering all the unused assets that apparently have been found hidden away. It's believed that there was more planned, but the company got rushed to get the game finished and released. Whether true or not, the second disc of the game loses most of the dungeons and exploration found throughout the first disc, and instead just kind of focuses on characters telling the story of what happened, followed by a small foray into an area, then a boss fight. It's a distinct departure from the basic show-don't-tell mentality. That being said, even with the bare bones of the second disc, the whole game shines on as brilliance and fun. And the soundtrack. Mitsuda shows his stuff once again, proving he's capable of coming up with a sound of or feeling for anything. In Chrono Trigger, he made sure every time period had a distinct sound that made you feel the energy of the times that you were in. In Cross, the whole soundtrack had a bit of a Caribbean, islandy sort of flair to it, which, made sense considering the plot's major location is on an island. In Gears, he chose to go with a more poppy sort of sound, inspired by Irish and Celtic influences, to produce a soundtrack that's almost ethereal at times. And the use of vocals in certain tracks, especially in some of the combat music, reminds me of some of the classic electronic sounds where quotes from old sci-fi movies were woven into the melody just to add a little bit of depth and fun. And then, probably one of the greatest video game songs ever composed, Flight. Played during several high-energy scenes in the game, it's one of those tracks that can really get the heart racing and send a chill down your spine. Supremely heroic, whenever this track starts playing, you know something big is about to go down. It's like when the Megazord is on its last legs, so the Rangers come up with some plan, and then the theme song starts to play, and you just know that there's no chance the Rangers will lose. Did I just make another Power Rangers reference? What is wrong with me? Back to the topic at hand. In the end, even with its flaws, Xenogears is probably one of the most memorable gaming experiences that I've ever had. It's no wonder it's hailed as a classic staple of the PSX era. If you've never experienced Xenogears yourself, and you're a fan of martial arts and giant robots, then you're a fool if you don't take a look at this wonderful game. Letter E. Breath of Fire 3. Now, remember a few favorites ago when I mentioned my love of dragons? Well, this next game was probably the one that helped to cement that love deep within my soul. I still remember the first time I played it. But first, a little backstory. Growing up, my family was a Nintendo household. Sure, we had a Sega Genesis at one point, but aside from that, every other system we had was a Nintendo. NES, SNES, Game Boy, 64. Then, one day, during Christmas holiday, we were back home in Ohio, and walking through the mall. We had just gotten done with some family photos, we were making our way to the exit, when we passed by a stand displaying PlayStations. And on sale. Now, I don't remember how we did it, but somehow, without much persuasion, my grandmother picked up one of those boxes, told us to pick out a few games. That would be her Christmas present to me and my sister. I remember we had picked out 3 games, at least. One was a forgettable racing title, and the second was Bust-A-Move 2, the game that became a furious competition in my house as to who was the master of popping bubbles. Me. Always me. And last was Breath of Fire 3. Well, I'd heard of Breath of Fire, of course. We grew up with a subscription to Nintendo Power. And one of my favorite things to do was just sit around and read those now classic issues and find out about games that I didn't own and couldn't play. Among the titles I'd read about were the first 2 Breath of Fire games. Of course, I'd read about them so long before it didn't stick that these were games about changing into dragons. Though I learned about that one soon enough. Not only do you turn into a dragon throughout the game, but you actually start as one. Okay, well, not a full-fledged dragon, but a baby whelp at least. The game begins in a chrism mine. Now, in this world, the substance known as chrism is a sort of allegory to crude oil, or possibly even uranium in a way. It's produced by the bodies of ancient dragons whose magical power caused their skeletons to crystallize into a potent energy storage device. Now, much of the rest of the world has figured out how to use this energy in various ways, including a form of electricity to power machines. Deep in the mine, in the center of a large block of chrism ore, awaits our hero, Ryu. Dragon in Japanese, of course. Ryu wakes up when his crystal womb is cracked open, and he runs amok throughout the mines, killing some miners. Eventually he's captured, sent off on a train, escapes the train, and is found by a pair of boys named Ray and Tipo. What follows is a humorous, heartwarming, and terrifying story of one young man's attempt to come to grips with his existence as one of the last members of the Brood, a draconic bloodline that was said to have been slaughtered to the last in the Great War. Now, throughout the game, Ryu collects Brood genes, which allow him to change into various draconic forms, from the previously mentioned whelp to a full dragon, behemoth, warrior, all the way to the ultimate form of Kaiser Dragon, which I always called Super Saiyan Dragon Mode. Now, there's even a gene that, if used right, allows you to combine with the members of your party into special dragon types. I never actually got this one to work myself, but it's there. And what a cast of party members we have! There's a were-tiger, a mage princess, a rabbit-eared inventor, and my favorite, the draconic guardian, Gar. What's most interesting to me about the party is the way they change over time. See, Ryu starts off as a coward, literally covering his head when he swings his sword. And quite wildly, I might add, And at one point, this changes to him having a more confident swing. And then, after a specific point in the game, we have a time skip in which several of the characters actually grow up, including in appearance. Now, the storyline of the game runs the gamut in terms of plot lines. From the downside of being a hero to slavery, destiny, and ultimately to destroying a god before they ruin the world. The mystery and majesty of Breath of Fire 3 is quite compelling, and I found myself rooting for Ryu and his team all the way through. By now, I've played and beaten the first two, the fourth, and played a partway through Dragon Quarter. Newsflash, it sucked. And in my mind, 3 is still at the top of the list. That's why it has my spot as letter E. That and, dragons.
Letter D. Final Fantasy VI.
Now, if you've been following me, and especially my Let's Play, then this game is no surprise to you at all. What can I say about Final Fantasy VI that I haven't covered thus far in my Let's Play? Well, I can certainly try and find something. First, we'll start with the story. The world of Final Fantasy VI is, for all intents and purposes, a post-apocalyptic scenario. Years ago, the War of the Magi waged across the planet and devastated the population. After the war ended, the use of magic was discontinued and the Espers fled to the safety of their hidden and sealed village. We fast forward many years and we find ourselves learning that someone, most likely the Gestalian Empire, is attempting to reawaken magic and rekindle the great war that was fought so long ago. Now first, the story seems a bit cliché, and for the first half of the game it seems that the story is going to follow the most logical turn of events, until Kefka shows just how batshit insane he is and actually executes his plan that he has set in place. Now, throwing the world into even more chaos, the overworld changes to what's now known as the World of Ruin, a post-apocalyptic wasteland where Kefka is a god. Now, Kefka, the insane clown himself, like the Joker with a shorter fuse and fewer gadgets, Kefka's greed and lust for power literally knows no bounds. So starting off simply as the court mage of the Gestalian Empire, Kefka quickly proves himself a narcissistic and evil son of a bitch. His mind is twisted by whatever techniques were used to infuse him with magic. Kefka changes from a minor annoyance to the main villain right around the midpoint of the game. The scariest thing about Kefka, I mean, other than his complete and total disregard for any form of life save for his own, and I'm not even really sure about that, is the fact that, well, he succeeds in his plan. I mean, if you can call it a plan. Look, so many other villains are thwarted by the hero before they have the chance to execute their plans, but Kefka, man does exactly what he sets out to do. He quite literally becomes a god. I mean, this isn't Sephiroth, who just needs for Meteor to be summoned to gain power, or Zeramus, who is trying to corrupt all of humanity. No. Kefka's closest competitor in achievement is Garland, way back in Final Fantasy I, who actually became Chaos. But even then, Kefka still has a one-up on Garland, because Kefka is a god when you face him. He didn't just become one last week. No, he's been a god for a good long while. He built a tower. He's punished towns for not following him. He is the living embodiment of magic. So much so that when he's finally defeated, all of magic starts to wither away and die. But the party fights on anyway, because really, it's the only choice the world has to survive. The cast list for Final Fantasy VI is staggering, especially for a game made in its time. 14 main playable characters make up the main cast, with an additional 4 as temporary party members. That number bumps up yet again if you count all of the Moogles that help you during one fight. Though, each of these Moogles does technically correspond to a party member that you get later in the game, but I think we can sort of count them. Now, the best thing about this cast list is the depth in which most of the characters are shown to have. Save for Gogo, the mime who can be considered a hidden character and has utterly no dialogue, and Umaro, who's just a Yeti that works for Mog. Every character has a distinct personality and backstory as to who they are. and each one of them grows and changes throughout the journey. Now, I'm not trying to spoil too much, as a lot of this will be seen during my Let's Play, but I'll leave you guys with this little-known tidbit. One of the features I always thought was really cool way back when I first played this on the SNES was the ability to go into the settings and change which controller controlled which characters. In essence, this made the game, at least for battles, a two-player experience. We didn't use it that much, but it was kind of a fun little setting. Any way you look at it, Final Fantasy VI is an incredible game. Probably the best Final Fantasy to exist. And my choice for letter D.
Letter C. Final Fantasy IV.
Now, I know what some of you are going to say. I just finished saying that Final Fantasy VI is probably the best one. So why then is Final Fantasy IV higher on the list? Now remember what I said a few minutes before, about this being a list with a rather arbitrary scaling system? Final Fantasy VI may be the better game in many ways, but 4 is still my favorite. Why? A fellow YouTuber who isn't me probably said it best. Matthew Patrick, better known as Matt Pat from Game Theory, had a spot on the Completionist's Final Fantasy VII Week where he stated a theory. That theory was, quite simply, that a person's first Final Fantasy is their favorite. And in my case, he's absolutely right. Now let me take you back several years. I already mentioned that my family was a Nintendo family, but that being said, we didn't actually have an NES of our own for some time. We borrowed one from one of my father's friends, and he'd rent out games for us to play, like Mega Man. Oh, how I loved Mega Man. A few years later, he came home with a bright, shiny box, and inside was a little gray device with purple switches. The Super Nintendo, our very first gaming system. Now, of course, I spent a lot of time playing Super Mario World on that little system, and in later years it would see me through A Link to the Past, Super Metroid, SimCity, but one game would capture my young attention for years. Final Fantasy II, or 4 in the original Japanese, but we didn't know any better at the time. And to this day, I know the first portion of the game by heart, having repeated it so many times over and over and over and over again. You see, my young mind couldn't wrap itself around the concept of not fighting in a battle. So every time I'd get to a point where Cecil battles his own shadow, I'd just have to start it all over again. Eventually, I'd figure out the trick. Or ask my dad. And finally be able to advance further. Now, Final Fantasy II, or 4, is a hero's quest. It's my hero's quest. This is the game that introduced me to two of my favorite character classes ever. The first being the Paladin. See, when Cecil lets go of his darkness and embraces the light in his heart, he is engulfed by the purity of white magic, becoming a noble and powerful knight class called the Paladin. It's such an important part of the game that there's even a specific fanfare called the Paladin to be played alongside this scene. This scene, where Cecil faces off against his own darkness, always kind of resonated with me. To this day, I find it very hard to play an evil character in a video game. And to me, the fun is in playing the hero, the warrior of light who vanquishes the darkness and destroys evil. And what's more heroic than a man who willingly chooses to give up his hatred and anger, to let go of the darkness within and embrace the good and the light? The fact that well before this, Cecil talks about how hopeless things are and how he's nothing but a coward with a dark sword, makes his transformation even better. He goes from said cowardly knight to a noble man who's willing to stand up for what he believes in. Now that is my kind of hero right there. Now the other class that I mentioned is Dragoon. That's not for any kind of nobility or heroic reasons. I just kind of think the idea of a guy wearing armor that looks like a dragon and jumping around with a spear is kind of awesome. Now the thing I remember most about my playthroughs of Final Fantasy IV was, well, it was in my reading the dialogue. What, you thought me doing funny voices for characters is a new thing? Hell no. This is the game that started it all. Not only would I read the text, but, I'd often read it aloud, and in different voices for every character. I think this is where my love for reading came about, as well as my love for RPGs. Sure, Mario could jump on enemies and fly, But could he summon explosions of fire at will, call upon the creatures of the underworld to destroy his enemies, rain destructive meteors down from the stars to end all creation? Ahem. While it may have its flaws, including a plot hole or two, a bomb ring, really? How do you not know? Final Fantasy IV still holds up to this day as a wonderful story and an engaging game to run through. The DS port is currently available on Steam, along with a graphically updated version of the After Years, the sequel that came out a few years ago. If you've never played Final Fantasy IV, then this is a great way to have your first look. I promise, you won't be disappointed. Letter B. Baldurs Gate 2. Oh, Black Isle Studios. How we miss you. You had to know if Dragon Age was on my list, then either this or Neverwinter Nights had to show up somewhere as well. If I had to be honest, I don't think there's an RPG, save for an MMO or two, that I spent more time playing than Baldur's Gate 2. And 2 specifically. Now don't get me wrong, 1 was a fine game, but 2 was where Black Isle perfected their art, and the Infinity Engine. Based upon 2nd edition Dungeons & Dragons, Baldur's Gate 2 places you in control of a fully customizable character called the Baalspawn. You're called this because before the Time of Troubles, a time when the gods of Abertorial walked as mortal avatars and were quite killable, Baal, the Lord of Murder, saw this coming and decided to circumvent it. Sowing his seed and siring a number of children across Toriel, Baal made sure his divinity would live on even though he would die during the Gods' War. Now, as one of these Baalspawn, it's your choice, and your choices alone, that shape the type of person your character is. Are they evil and maniacal just as their father? Or do you defy your destiny as a creature of murder and take a righteous path? Perhaps you just want to be left alone and forget everything to do with Baal. Unfortunately, that one's a bit more tricky, though. See, throughout the main game, you are after the main antagonist, a man known as Jonaleth Irenicus, who is voiced by David Warner, and is probably one of my favorite villains of all time. His propensity to make villain speeches is punctuated by his incredible strength and ability to make sure said speeches get said. There is no interrupting this guy. When David Warner speaks, you will listen. When you do finally beat him and think you're clear to just live out the rest of your life in peace, that's when the next chapter begins. Throne of Baal. See, way back in the first game, the bad guy was a man known as Sarevok. Sarevok was your half-brother, a Baalspawn, and one bad dude. He had, by the time you met him in the first game, already found and killed a number of other Baalspawn to take their divinity for his own. Almost akin to Highlander.
There can only be one.
But, see, he didn't kill them all. Throne of Baal has you facing the fact that you're a godchild by having to face off against the last of the remaining Baalspawn. Only when they are defeated can you make the choice. Take the mantle of your father and become a god, or leave the throne of murder empty and be rid of your divinity once and for all. A whole slew of characters join you for this journey, from your childhood friend Imoen, to the druid Jaheira, to everyone's favorite ranger hamster duo, Minsk and Boo. Minsk and Boo stand ready. The character choices run the gamut from lawful good paladins to chaotic evil mages, thieves, priests, druids, fighters. There's actually so many characters that sometimes it's hard to choose who you want to have in your party. Now, personally, one of my favorites, aside from Minsk, is Aerie. Now, I know I'll get a little bit of hate for saying this, but, I mean, what can I say? See, for those of you who don't know, Aerie is a wingless Avariel. The Avariel are a race of winged elves who usually stay well away from civilized species because of powerful xenophobia. Aerie was captured at a young age and forced into a traveling circus, shown off as a sort of freak of nature. Kept in a small cage and with no way to stretch her wings and exercise them, they became atrophied and diseased, eventually having to be removed. By the time you meet her, she's been wingless for some time, and being taken care of by a kindly gnome named Quail, the keeper of a circus of his own. Though I doubt it's the same one that she was sold to. She starts off with the combined attitude of, oh, woe is me, and let's help everyone, making her seem happy-go-lucky at one time and almost naive and then pouty and forlorn to round it out. The last one, of course, seems to make a lot of people hate the character. But I don't mind it. I already mentioned that I like playing the hero, and helping little Aerie to become a stronger person just makes me feel good. That and her combined classes of mage and cleric come in really handy in later levels. And then there's the mods. Oh my god, the mods for this game. I'll have to do an LP of Baldur's Gate 2 just to show off some of the mods available. There are mods that add new characters, mods that modify existing characters, mods to make the romance options more interactive, mods to extend content, restore content that was removed or added in new quests. There's even a rather risque mod that makes Imoen a viable candidate for romance. There are even mods that exist for no other reason than to fix bugs, acting like an unofficial patch. And then there's Tutu. Baldur's Gate Tutu is a mod that allows you to take the original Baldur's Gate and port its contents into the more updated version of Baldur's Gate 2's Infinity engine. And there are even mods just for the Tutu version, allowing for characters and quests to span both games. It's insane the sort of replayability that comes out of this game, and the mods just make it even better. It's available for purchase on a certain website that's good for old games, so if you've never experienced it before, take a trip through the web and pick it up. I promise, if you're a fan of old school RPGs and old school D&D, you won't be disappointed. Honorable mentions. Now, before I continue to my letter A pick for the best party-based RPG, I'd like to bring forward a few honorable mentions. Now, as I said before, these honorable mentions are either games that didn't fit on my list or I just haven't finished. Another side note, this is not a comprehensive list. Just a couple off the top. And it's in no particular order. I also won't be displaying any footage, so if you'd like to know more about the games, just look them up. Use Google. You know, that thing that we're sort of connected to because of YouTube. Septerra Core is the first one on this list. Septerra Core Legacy of the Creator. It's a quirky little PC RPG that's based in a cyberpunky sort of universe. It's almost akin to a marriage of Fallout and Final Fantasy VI. And it's set in a world that's literally concentric shelves of land spinning about the open air in around a core. And it's an interesting little title of mystery and intrigue that's worth a look. The next one is Might and Magic 6, The Mandate of Heaven. It's a really old school RPG. Might and Magic 6 is like combining a session of Dungeons & Dragons with Star Trek. See, it's set in the land of Enroth. And Might and Magic 6 starts off like any medieval adventure with swords and magic, and then ends with spaceships and blasters. And there's even an appearance by Q, if you know where to look. Final Fantasy IX. Now really, I can list a bunch of other Final Fantasy games, but 9 really stands out in recent years as one of the best. And one of the ones that made me cry when it was over. The plan with Final Fantasy IX was for the franchise to return to its roots, and yeah, it did just that. Knights of the Old Republic. Now ask anyone I know, and they will tell you. I am a huge Star Wars fan. That said, I'm almost surprised that KOTOR didn't make it to my top J. But with all the other games on there, it was really tough to choose. That being said, KOTOR and KOTOR 2 would probably rank K and L just for their marriage of Star Wars and D&D mechanics. And now for a recap. Letter J, Dragon Age Origins. Letter I, Legend of Dragoon. Letter H, Super Mario RPG. Letter G, Earthbound. Letter F, Xenogears. Letter E, Breath of Fire 3. Letter D, Final Fantasy VI. Letter C, Final Fantasy IV. Letter B, Baldur's Gate 2. And the letter A pick, and my top favorite party-based RPG, is Chrono Trigger. Now, really, who didn't see this one coming? Anyone who knows anything about classic RPGs know that Chrono Trigger has to be on the list somewhere. A change from the classic Final Fantasy franchise, Square decided they wanted to do something a little different, taking their first foray to the science fiction genre of a sort. Chrono Trigger is, as its name implies, a game about one of my favorite science fiction tropes, time travel. Starting off in the year 1000 AD, we begin in the shoes of a young man named Chrono, who, thanks to the art of Akira Toriyama, looks like he stepped straight out of Dragon Ball Z. A silent protagonist, Chrono lives in a town that's part of the Kingdom of Guardia, who is celebrating the Millennial Fair. Now, this is a fair to celebrate the destruction of the mage villain Magus, the Fiend Lord, several hundred years prior. Heading to the fair himself, Chrono quickly finds himself in a world of chaos as he bumps into a young girl who ends up being the princess of the country. And he does literally run into her. There's no way to avoid it. You can't talk to her, you have to step into a sprite and get launched. This leads to the two of them going to see Chrono's inventor friend, Luca, and her transporter. Now, when Chrono steps in and tries it out, he appears on the other side without incident. But when the princess does the same, though, her pendant reacts and she is launched into a time portal back to before Magus was defeated. Now, Chrono, of course, goes back in time to find her and ends up on a quest that culminates in trying to stop an intergalactic entity named Lavos from destroying the world in the future. Now, gameplay is reminiscent of Final Fantasy, though battles aren't random and are fought in a location where you meet the enemies. Skills and spells still exist, as do special abilities called dual and triple techs, where characters can combine their powers together for far more powerful attacks and heals. And what characters we have! Oh boy, taking the character from nearly every time period you go to, including the one you can choose not to take, you have the three from the present time, Chrono, Marl, and Luca. You have Glenn, a warrior of Guardia who was turned into a frog. Robo, an advanced robot from the year 2400 AD. Isla, the cave woman from prehistoric times. And last, but certainly not least, Magus. Yes, that's right. The evil mage you are set out to fight when you go back to the year 600 AD, he can literally actually join the party. And he's even more badass than you realize once his backstory is revealed. Now, the biggest feature Chrono Trigger gave us was the new Game Plus. Beating Lavos the first time isn't enough, oh no. You can go through again with the same stats and gear as the first time around and play through the game yet again. And you can beat it at any time you like, of course. You just take the bucket to the year of Lavos once you reach the end of time, and you can face him at any time you like. And it's an interesting thing when you do. See, depending on how quickly you go off to fight Lavos and what things you have or haven't done, will lead to a different sort of ending. From one where you get to meet the game's creators, to one where you get to watch a video and hear Chrono speak for the first time, to actual endings where the mystics never were wiped out, or Chrono stays dead. Wait, what's that? Yes, you heard it right. Chrono, the main character of the game, dies at one point, sacrificing himself to save the rest of the party from one of Lavos' most devastating attacks. From that point on, the party has to try to find a way to get him back, mixing a bit of time travel with magic once again to make sure their good friend stays alive. Now, what's more is once you have him back in your party, you don't even have to use him anymore. Up to that point, he's kind of been the central character, but once you reach the end of the game, the focus is more on the end of Lavos. You can use whoever you want in your party to beat him, even if it's not Chrono. The replayability of the game with the New Game Plus Edition makes things really enjoyable. And the good thing is you don't have to work your way through the slog again and again to see all the different endings. You know, by the time you beat Lavos, your characters are pretty high level, and you can breeze through the early portions of the game pretty quickly, so getting to each of the endings isn't a big deal anymore. As I said before, the art of the game was done by Akira Toriyama, and I think that's one of the high points of the game. Sure, some of the characters look ripped from Dragon Ball Z, but that just goes to enhance the visual appeal in my eyes. And really, the sprites themselves are fantastic. Being a 16-bit game does nothing to keep the animations and colors from popping out and being exciting and fun. And the music. Oh man, if there's any game whose music I can listen to over and over again, this is it. Once again, Yasunori Mitsuda shows his best in developing a soundtrack with individual tunes that easily highlight any scene they are played in. Overall, this is probably the perfect RPG, or at least as close as you can get to it. The DS version, which came out a few years ago, makes it even better by adding new weapons, monsters, and one super boss that connects Trigger to Cross directly. It even helps to give you a little boost in your levels, so you're really prepared to take on Lavos in the end. Now, yes, some of the additions feel a little tacked on, but they're still fun and enjoyable. And in the end, Chrono Trigger is a game that's touched my life for the better, and will remain at number 1 for a very long time. And with that, my list is done. Now you know a little bit more about me than you did before, and the sorts of games that I find enjoyable. And I hope to see some of your lists down below, so I can see if there's anything I haven't played that I can take a look at. And if you haven't played some of the games on my list, well, now you know what they are. Go ahead and have a look. Maybe they won't be for you, but then again, maybe you'll find a new favorite. As always, I am AychekHD, and I'd like to thank you all for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you're enjoying what you've been seeing so far in my videos. And in the words of the Jedi Order of old, may the Force be with you. Take care.